The moon was quiet, a place of endless dust and stone. No trees, no rivers, only gray rock stretching as far as the eye could see. The human explorers had landed there 3 days ago, sent by the Space Union to study strange energy signals that had been detected. Paul, the leader of the crew, stood near the ridge of a crater and looked down at the landscape. His helmet reflected the pale light of a distant sun, and in his eyes there was both excitement and determination. He had led many missions before, but this one felt different. Something about the air, even though it was thin and filtered through their suits, felt heavier than usual. It was as if the moon itself wanted to keep its secrets. Behind him, Myra, the team's linguist, scanned the surface with her handheld device. She was smaller and quieter than the others, but her sharp mind often noticed things that no one else did. "Paul," she said through the comms, "there's something under the ground here. I can see unusual shapes in the scans." Paul walked closer, his boots kicking up gray dust. "Shapes? What kind of shapes?" "Not natural," Myra replied. "Straight lines. Corners. It looks like a structure buried under the rock." The rest of the team gathered. There were 5 of them in total, all trained explorers, but even the most experienced among them felt a chill when they heard the word structure. Finding a natural cave was one thing. Finding something built was another. It meant intelligence, a history they knew nothing about. The crew began digging, using machines to cut through layers of stone and hardened soil. Hours passed, and the outlines of something enormous started to appear. Walls of black stone, smooth and cold, stood revealed beneath the dust. The deeper they dug, the more the shape became clear. It was a building, or perhaps a monument. Its surface was covered in carving symbols no human had ever seen before. "It looks like a tomb," whispered one of the crew members, almost afraid to speak the word. Paul placed his gloved hand against the wall. The stone was cold, yet it seemed to hum faintly under his touch. "If this is a tomb, then it's older than anything we've ever found. Look at the carvings. They haven't faded even after who knows how many centuries." Myra moved closer and examined the markings. Her visor lights revealed long lines, twisted circles, and sharp edges arranged in patterns. "This isn't random. It's a language. And not just a language, it's telling a story. Maybe a warning." The others looked at her with unease. Warnings carved into ancient stone never meant anything good. But Paul's eyes lit up with ambition. "Do you understand what this means? Humanity might be the first to uncover the secrets of an ancient civilization. This could change everything." Night came on the moon, though it was not truly night. The pale sun dipped low, leaving the surface bathed in shadow. The crew set up lights around the dig site, their beams cutting through the dark and shining against the black walls of the structure. It looked even more haunting under the artificial glow, like a giant waiting to awaken. Inside their camp shelter, the team ate quietly, the tension heavy in the air. Myra could not stop thinking about the carvings. The symbols seemed to shift in her memory, as though they were alive. She pulled up her notes and translated piece by piece. What she found unsettled her. The message spoke of a voice sealed away, a cry that could never be freed. It described not honor or peace, but danger. She went to Paul with her findings. "I think we should leave it alone," she said firmly. "The carvings are not just decoration. They are a warning. Whatever is inside, it was meant to stay sealed." Paul leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but firm. "Myra, every great discovery comes with fear. People said the same when humans first crossed oceans or landed on Mars. If we let fear stop us, we'll never move forward. This is our chance to give humanity a new chapter in history. Myra shook her head. This isn't about fear. It's about respect. Something powerful is sealed in there. Why risk opening it? Paul looked around at the others. Some of them nodded with Myra, but others shared his hunger for discovery. He knew his decision carried weight, but in his heart, the choice was already made. Tomorrow, he said at last, we open it? The camp fell into silence. Outside, the black tomb stood like a mountain of secrets. The lights cast long shadows across its surface, and in the stillness of the barren moon, the crew felt as though the structure was watching them. That night, Myra could not sleep. She sat near the window of the shelter, staring at the carvings. The wind outside moved dust across the stone, and for a brief moment, she thought she heard a low vibration coming from the tomb. It was faint, almost like a breath. She told herself it was her imagination, but deep inside she knew it was not. The silent discovery was no longer silent. Something beneath the stone was waiting. The next morning on the barren moon began with silence, broken only by the sound of machines drilling into stone. The crew worked with care, clearing away the last layers of dust from the strange structure. The tomb rose higher now, tall walls of black stone pressing against the empty sky. Its carvings shimmered faintly under the glow of their lights, as though the symbols were feeding on energy around them. Myra stood apart from the others, scanning the carvings again. Her device struggled to translate the symbols, but she had begun to see a pattern. Every line and circle repeated a theme: danger, warning, restraint. The more she studied, the colder she felt inside her suit. She hurried to Paul, who was giving instructions to the crew. "Paul," she said through the comms, her voice sharper than usual, "I've been looking deeper into the symbols. They don't just warn us. They describe a cry, a voice that must never be released. It says the voice destroys worlds." Paul turned toward her, his face hidden behind the visor, but she could hear the steady tone in his reply. "Myra, we came here to learn. A civilization that built this could teach us things beyond imagination. Do you want us to walk away without knowing?" "It's not about knowing," she answered firmly. "It's about survival. What if the people who built this tomb sealed something inside because it was dangerous? What if they wanted to protect others from it?" The crew listened to the exchange, and tension spread among them. Tomasz, the engineer, muttered, "Maybe she's right. The ground feels strange. Every time I walk near the walls, my suit sensors flicker." But another crew member, Lena, shook her head. "We've risked too much to stop now. Think about what we could bring back. History, knowledge, technology. This is what explorers are meant to do." Paul used their words to strengthen his case. "Humanity has always pushed forward. We found fire, we crossed seas, we reached the stars. If the builders of this tomb left secrets behind, it's our duty to uncover them." Myra wanted to argue more, but she saw the decision forming in Paul's eyes. He was not reckless, but he was driven, and once his mind was set, it was hard to move him. Still, she could not give up. "At least wait," she pleaded. "We should run more tests, gather more scans. If the tomb is truly sealed against something dangerous, breaking it open could wake it." Paul hesitated. For a moment, Myra thought he might agree. But then he looked at the towering stone structure, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We will be careful, but we will not wait. Tomorrow we open it." The day passed slowly. The crew prepared tools and machines, checking every detail for the work to come. Yet unease followed them everywhere. Strange vibrations moved under the ground, too faint to measure but strong enough to make them uneasy. When they switched off their drills, sometimes they thought they heard soft echoes, as if the stone itself was breathing. By evening, the sky above the moon was dark. The pale sun had dipped behind the horizon, leaving the land in shadow. Floodlights surrounded the tomb, bright beams cutting into the blackness. The camp stood close by, its small dome shelter glowing faintly. Inside, the crew sat in silence, each person lost in thought. Myra studied her notes again. The carvings spoke of a scream that could shatter the mind. The words were repeated over and over, carved into the stone as if the builders had wanted to make sure no one ever forgot. She imagined the people who had once lived here. Had they been afraid as they sealed the tomb? Had they known others might one day find it? Her heart felt heavy. She looked around the shelter at her fellow explorers. Tomasz adjusted tools. Lena checked the supply list. Paul sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the map of the site. He looked calm, but Myra could see the weight in his shoulders. He knew the risks. He just believed the reward was greater. As the crew began to rest, Myra stayed awake. She could not sleep. She sat near the window of the shelter, staring out at the tomb. Its black walls reflected the light in strange ways, as if shadows crawled across the carvings. Then, just as she closed her eyes for a moment, she felt a vibration through the ground. Her eyes shot open. The lights outside flickered once, then steadied. She pressed her hand against the wall of the shelter, and there it was again, faint, but real. A low sound, not loud enough to be called a noise, but not silence either. It was like the earth was humming, a deep breath taken by something vast and unseen. Myra whispered to herself, though no one could hear her. It's already awake. When she turned back toward the tomb, she thought she saw the carvings glow faintly, as if answering her fear. The morning came with an uneasy silence. The barren moon stretched out in endless gray, and the black tomb stood tall under the floodlights, waiting. Paul gathered the crew near the sealed entrance, his voice steady through the comms. Today we step into history. We will be careful, but we will not turn back. No one answered at first. Each member of the team carried both fear and curiosity. Tomasz adjusted the drill unit. Lena checked the energy cutters. Myra stood with folded arms, her expression tense. She had argued all night in her head, but Paul's decision was final. The tomb would be opened. The machines whirred to life. Sparks flew as the drills and cutters bit into the stone seam where the door stood sealed. At first nothing happened. The stone was strong, harder than anything they had cut before. But slowly, piece by piece, cracks began to appear. Dust rose in thin clouds, floating in the weak gravity. The crew worked in shifts, sweat running down their faces inside their helmets, until at last a deep crack split across the surface of the door. Myra's voice rose with panic. Stop. The symbol said, this voice destroys worlds. Don't you hear the ground? It's already vibrating. But Paul pressed forward. We came here for truth. If we walk away, we will never know. Humanity has to know. The final cut was made, and with a grinding sound, the massive door shifted. It did not fall outward or inward. It slid to the side, as though guided by unseen hands. A gap opened, wide enough for them to see inside. The moment the gap appeared, the moon itself seemed to roar. A scream erupted from the tomb. It was not a sound made by machine or wind. It was alive, filled with pain and fury, layered with countless voices. The scream poured into their helmets, shaking their bones, rattling their teeth. The floodlights flickered wildly. Equipment shut down. One of the crew dropped to his knees, clutching his head, his eyes squeezed shut in agony. Even Paul stumbled, fighting to stay on his feet. Myra screamed back, not from courage but from fear, as if her own voice might protect her from the force pressing against her mind. The scream did not just echo through the air, it vibrated in their very thoughts. Images burst across their vision, flashes of burning skies, collapsing cities, and shadowed figures covering their ears as they fell. It was not language, but everyone understood the meaning. It was destruction. Then, as suddenly as it began, the scream stopped. Silence returned, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence after a storm, heavy and broken. The door stood open now, revealing a dark passage that led into the tomb's heart. The crew breathed hard, gasping for air though their suits supplied plenty. The one who had collapsed slowly stood, shaken but alive. Paul steadied himself and spoke, though his voice carried a tremor. It's just sound. We can handle this. We must continue." Myra turned on him, anger in her eyes. "Just sound? That was no sound. That was a warning, a weapon, maybe both. If you lead us in there, we may not come out." Paul looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were troubled, but his will remained. "Myra, if we stop here, we will never understand what this place is. The scream was meant to frighten us away. That alone means there is something inside worth seeing." The others stood uncertain, torn between his conviction and Myra's fear. Tomasz finally spoke. "We came this far. If we go back, the Union will send another team. At least we are here to see it ourselves." Myra's heart sank. She knew she could not stop them. The pull of discovery was too strong, even when death stood in front of them. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "Then at least let me go first. If I can read the symbols, maybe I can guide us." Paul nodded, though hesitation flickered in his eyes. "All right. But we go together." The crew checked their lights and weapons, though no one knew what good they would do. Slowly, carefully, they stepped forward. The entrance loomed over them, tall and wide, filled with shadow. As they crossed the threshold, the air changed. Even through their suits they felt it thicker, heavier, carrying a faint hum like distant thunder. The floor beneath their boots was made of the same black stone as the walls, polished smooth. Strange markings lined the passage, glowing faintly with a dull red light, as though the tomb itself was waking from slumber. Their beams cut through the darkness, but the light seemed swallowed by the vast space. Behind them, the door rumbled, closing a little more as if the tomb did not wish to stay open. The sound echoed down the passage, making everyone shiver. Myra whispered through the comms, her voice barely steady. "The carvings say the voice was sealed here because it could not be destroyed. It was locked away so it would never touch another world." Paul looked at the dark ahead, his jaw tight. "Then we need to see what that voice is." The crew walked deeper, their footsteps the only sound in the endless black corridor. Every step carried them further from safety, further into the heart of the tomb that had screamed when opened. The passage stretched on like a throat leading into the heart of some ancient beast. The walls were high and smooth, carved with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly as the crew passed. Their boots tapped softly against the stone floor, the sound swallowed quickly by the heavy silence. The deeper they walked, the more they felt as if the tomb itself was listening to them. Myra stayed at the front, her eyes fixed on the carvings. She ran her scanner across the walls, recording everything. The symbols were clearer now, their patterns easier to follow. "These are warnings," she said, her voice quiet through the comms. "The builders didn't just seal something away. They wanted anyone who found this to turn back." Paul walked behind her, his light beam cutting across the darkness. His voice was calm, though his grip on his tool tightened. "Warnings don't stop explorers. Warnings show us we are close to something important." Lena let out a nervous laugh. "Important or deadly? Sometimes they mean the same thing." The group pressed forward. The air inside grew heavier, almost like pressure pushing down on their chests. Their suits worked fine, but every breath still felt harder. Tomasz muttered, "Feels like we're walking underwater." Finally the passage opened into a vast chamber. The explorers stopped in awe. The ceiling rose higher than any of their lights could reach, vanishing into shadow. Across the wide floor stood rows of statues, dozens of them, each carved in the likeness of tall alien figures. The statues were frozen in poses of fear, their hands covering their ears, their faces twisted in silent screams. The sight chilled the crew. No one spoke for a moment. Then Myra whispered, "They were afraid of the sound. Even in stone, they still cover their ears." Paul stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. The statues stood in neat lines, leading toward the center of the chamber. There, resting on a raised platform, was a massive sarcophagus made of black metal and crystal. It pulsed faintly with light, a slow rhythm like the beat of a heart. The crew moved closer, their lights reflecting off the strange surface. The sarcophagus was covered with more carvings, sharper and brighter than the ones on the walls. Myra bent down to study them, her breath quickening. "This is it. This is the source of the warnings." She touched the glowing lines with her gloved hand. "The carvings speak of a queen, a voice that cannot die. They sealed her in this chamber to keep her from ever being heard again." Tomasz shivered. "So the scream we heard, it came from here?" Myra nodded. "Yes. And it was not just a sound. It was a signal. I think it was sent beyond this moon. Whoever built this tomb wanted others to know if the seal was broken." The thought hung in the air, heavy with fear. If the scream had carried across space, who or what might have heard it? Paul approached the sarcophagus. The pulsing glow reflected across his visor. "This is the greatest discovery of our time. A living being preserved for thousands, maybe millions of years. Imagine what we could learn." Myra spun toward him, her voice sharp. "Paul, don't touch it. The builders sealed her here because she is dangerous. We should document everything and leave before it's too late." But Paul shook his head. "We cannot walk away now. History won't remember us for finding a sealed door. It will remember us for uncovering the truth behind it." The others stood torn between his determination and Myra's warning. Lena's voice cracked slightly as she said, "If that scream was a signal, then maybe others are already on their way here. Shouldn't we think about what happens if we open this further?" Paul placed his hand against the cold metal surface of the sarcophagus. The glow beneath his palm pulsed faster, as though answering his touch. A deep vibration filled the chamber, rattling the statues and shaking dust from the high ceiling. The crew staggered back, their lights flickering. Myra shouted, "Stop! You're waking it." But the pulse continued, growing stronger with each passing second. The statues cracked, thin lines spreading across their stone faces. A low hum filled the chamber, building towards something greater, something unbearable. The crew aimed their lights back at the sarcophagus. The glow spread across its surface, bright enough to make them shield their eyes. The chamber shook harder, and pieces of rock fell from above. The statues began to crumble, releasing faint streams of light that floated like ghostly shapes in the air. Paul pulled his hand away, but it was too late. The sarcophagus shifted. Its crystal top slid slightly, releasing a hiss of ancient air. From within, a shadow moved. The faint outline of a tall figure could be seen pressing against the surface. Myra's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what was happening, and she felt powerless to stop it. The warnings, the screams, the statues of fear, it had all been for this moment. Something inside the tomb was awakening. The chamber filled with a sound, not a scream this time, but a deep voice like a storm rolling across the land. It was not in any human language, but every crew member understood it in their minds. The voice carried one meaning: release. The crew backed away in terror as the sarcophagus began to open. The chamber shook as the sarcophagus slid open, releasing a hiss of cold air that had been trapped for ages. A pale mist spread across the floor, curling around the explorers' boots. The glow from the crystal lid grew brighter, then dimmed, as though the tomb itself had taken a deep breath. Paul stood at the edge of the platform, his eyes locked on the figure inside. His hands trembled, but he did not step back. "This is it," he whispered, though his voice was carried clearly through the comms. "The being inside has survived across time itself." The mist parted, and the figure inside became clear. A tall form lay within, wrapped in thin layers of metallic cloth that shimmered faintly with energy. The shape was alien yet graceful, with long limbs and sharp features unlike anything human. At the center of its chest, a faint light pulsed like a heartbeat. Myra gripped her scanner, fear tightening her chest. "Paul, this is not a discovery we can control. The warning said the voice cannot die. It was sealed here because it was too dangerous." Before Paul could answer, the figure's eyes snapped open. Two glowing orbs of silver light stared at them, bright enough to pierce through the mist. The crew froze, every instinct screaming at them to run. The chamber filled with a piercing cry, a scream far louder and sharper than before. It rolled through the air like thunder, shaking the walls, sending cracks racing across the statues. The explorers fell to their knees, covering their helmets as the sound pushed into their minds. It was not only noise. It was thought, memory, and feeling, all forced into them at once. They saw visions of towering cities crumbling under waves of sound. They saw worlds silenced as the voice ripped through the skies. They saw armies falling, their weapons useless against a force that could not be touched. The scream was endless, yet it spoke. Words formed in their minds without sound. I was queen. I was voice. I was storm. Myra fought to steady herself, forcing her eyes open through the pain. She saw the figure rising from the sarcophagus, the metallic cloth falling away piece by piece. The alien queen stood tall, her body glowing with faint lines of energy that ran across her skin like rivers of light. She lifted her head, and her voice shook the chamber again. Paul struggled to stand, his voice hoarse. "Wait. We are not your enemies. We are explorers. We mean no harm." The queen's gaze fell on him. For a moment the screaming lessened, replaced by heavy silence. Then a new wave of sound filled their minds, softer but sharper, like a blade pressed against thought. "You broke the seal. You woke the voice. You are the first to hear me since the fall of my people." Her tone was not anger alone. It carried grief, Sorrow that felt endless. Images filled the crew's minds once more. An empire spread across stars, filled with music and sound, a civilization built on harmony. Then came destruction. The voice itself, once a gift, had become a weapon. It tore through allies and enemies alike, until only silence remained. The queen was the last, entombed by her own people, not as punishment but as warning. Myra's heart pounded as the vision faded. She whispered, "They sealed her to protect the galaxy. Not to save her, but to save everyone else." The queen stepped down from the platform, her tall form towering above the humans. The glow of her body lit the chamber, casting long shadows. Her presence was overwhelming, yet her movements were slow, almost weary. Lena's voice cracked as she spoke. "What do we do now? If she's awake, then the scream we heard earlier, it wasn't just for us. It was a signal. Others might have heard it." The queen's silver eyes glowed brighter. She raised her arms, and the chamber shook with another deep sound. The statues around them crumbled completely, breaking into dust and light that drifted into the air. The sarcophagus sealed itself shut behind her, its glow fading as if its duty was complete. Paul steadied his breath. He forced his voice to stay calm. "If you are awake, then perhaps you can tell us what must be done. We are not here to harm you. But if your voice can destroy worlds, we cannot let it escape uncontrolled." The queen tilted her head, studying him. Her glowing lines pulsed softly, like the fading beat of a drum. Then she spoke again, not with sound but with thought. "You cannot stop what has begun. The scream has carried beyond stars. Others will come. The seal is broken. The voice is free once more." The crew fell into silence, the weight of her words pressing down heavier than any sound. Myra clenched her fists. She had feared this from the start, and now it was too late. The tomb was no longer a prison. It was a beacon. The queen lowered her arms, and for a brief moment her expression shifted. Her glowing eyes dimmed, and in her gaze there was something like sorrow. She whispered into their thoughts, softer than before. "You were brave to enter. You were foolish to stay. But perhaps you may yet choose the path forward." The chamber grew quiet again, but the silence felt fragile, ready to shatter at any moment. The queen was awake, and the fate of more than just the crew now hung in the balance. The alien queen stood in the center of the chamber, her glowing lines of energy casting long shadows across the broken statues. The explorers remained frozen, unsure whether to move closer or flee. Paul's hand hovered over his tool, while Myra clutched her scanner, hoping to capture as much as possible without drawing attention. Then the queen extended her arms. A wave of light spread from her body, filling the chamber and washing over the crew. The light was not harsh, but it carried a strange warmth and a pull that made their minds reel. Visions began to form in front of their eyes, not as images on a screen, but as memories imprinted directly into their thoughts. Myra gasped. "She's showing us something. We can see what happened to her people." The first vision was of a thriving empire, stretching across countless planets. Cities floated in the skies, connected by bridges of glowing energy. Ships traveled between worlds silently, moving with a harmony that was beautiful to behold. The queen's people communicated not only with words, but with sound itself. Their voices carried energy, a power that could heal, build, or destroy. Then the vision shifted. Myra felt the cold bite of fear as she saw the weapon they had created, the same voice, turned into a scream that could annihilate planets. She saw cities crumble, stars shatter, and oceans boil under the force of sound. The empire fell apart, not because of enemies, but because their own creation could not be controlled. The voice became a curse, devouring friend and foe alike. The Queen's thoughts pressed into the crew's minds. I was the last. I carried the voice to the tomb. I was sealed here to prevent further destruction. Paul struggled to comprehend. So she was not imprisoned as punishment. She was protecting others. Myra nodded. Yes. The scream, the tomb, the statues, they are all warnings. The builders wanted to make sure no one would release her again. They knew what the voice could do. The visions grew darker. Myra saw the tomb being sealed long ago, with the Queen's body placed inside the sarcophagus and the chamber filled with wards and symbols. The statues were carved as lessons, showing fear and suffering so that anyone who entered would understand the danger. The Queen's scream, the one they had heard when opening the tomb, was part of the warning. It had traveled far, perhaps even reaching other star systems. Lena whispered, if the scream reached other worlds, then something or someone might already be on their way here. The Queen's energy pulsed again, and another vision appeared. This time it showed her awakening from the tomb. She reached toward the crew, not with anger, but with a gesture that demanded understanding. Her thoughts echoed in their minds, you are the first to hear me since my entombment. You broke the seal. The signal has already spread. Others will come. Prepare, or the universe may pay the price. Tomasz swallowed hard. We can't just run. We are the only ones here, and if anyone else comes, they won't understand what happened. They could trigger the voice without knowing. Paul clenched his fists. Then we have to do something. We can't leave it to chance. We have to protect humanity. Myra took a deep breath, her mind racing. The symbols on the walls, they can reseal her. We just need to activate them correctly. But it won't be easy. We have no guarantee the tomb will hold again. The Queen's eyes met theirs. She projected calmness into their minds, though the energy around her still vibrated with power. I do not wish to harm you. I am not your enemy, but the universe does not forgive ignorance. You must choose wisely. Paul stepped closer, determination in his stance. We will help. Tell us what to do. The Queen extended her hands, and the symbols on the walls glowed brighter, as if responding to her presence. The crew could see patterns in the carvings now, instructions hidden in lines and shapes. Myra leaned forward, her scanner recording every detail. She realized that the tomb had been designed to respond to someone with knowledge, someone willing to understand the risk. The Queen's voice echoed once more in their thoughts. If you fail, the scream will escape. Worlds will fall. If you succeed, humanity may learn wisdom from what I carry. Lena whispered, her voice trembling, we can do this. We have to. For everyone else. The crew gathered around the sarcophagus, their minds focused on the symbols and the Queen's guidance. Paul gave a nod, and they began following her instructions carefully. They worked together, activating energy conduits, touching the glowing lines, and pressing hidden switches revealed by the Queen's visions. As they moved, the Queen remained still, her body radiating a soft light, watching their every step. Every wrong motion sent vibrations through the chamber, reminders of the power they were dealing with. Every correct motion made the tomb respond, the walls humming faintly in approval. Myra could feel the Queen's thoughts merging with hers, guiding her hands. Be precise. Respect the warnings. Act with care. The realization struck them all, the scream had already reached across the stars. Their task now was not only to survive, but to prevent a disaster that could spread beyond their own world. Humanity's strength, their bravery, and their careful action were the only hope to contain what had been sealed for millennia. The Queen's eyes glowed softly, almost like a sign of trust. She had chosen them, even if they did not yet fully understand why. The weight of responsibility pressed on the explorers. They were not just witnesses to history, they were the guardians of it. The chamber was quiet, but the tension was unbearable. The alien queen stood at the center, her silver eyes watching every movement of the explorers. Light from the sarcophagus and the glowing walls filled the space, illuminating the shattered statues and the dust that floated like tiny stars. The crew knew that their next actions would decide the fate of more than just themselves. Myra knelt by the carvings, scanning and tracing each line with careful precision. Her fingers moved over the glowing symbols, activating sequences she had memorized from the Queen's visions. Each correct touch made the chamber hum softly, a sound that felt almost comforting after the terror they had endured. Paul stood beside her, checking the energy conduits and ensuring the sarcophagus remained stable. Tomasz and Lena moved in tandem, adjusting the panels and connecting the glowing circuits. The Queen's gaze followed them, but she did not intervene. Her presence was heavy, a reminder of the power they had released and the danger that still lingered. "Keep going," Myra whispered, her voice tense but steady. "We are close." The Queen's energy pulsed faintly in response to their actions. The light that had surrounded her now seemed to focus on the sarcophagus, guiding their hands as if urging them to complete the seal. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, forming patterns that Myra had never seen before. She realized these were instructions not just to seal, but to protect, to contain the scream that had already traveled beyond the tomb. Paul looked at her. "Do you think this will work?" Myra nodded, though doubt lingered. "It has to. If we fail, the scream could escape again. This tomb is the only thing standing between the voice and the galaxy." The alien queen lifted her arm slowly. A low vibration filled the chamber, like the heartbeat of the tomb itself. The crew felt the air thicken, pressing down on their chests, reminding them of the power that waited inside the sarcophagus. Myra took a deep breath and activated the final set of symbols. The walls around them shimmered, and the hum grew louder, but this time it was not painful. It was steady, controlled, as if the tomb itself was responding positively to their actions. The sarcophagus began to close slowly, sliding shut with a hiss of ancient air. Light from the Queen dimmed, and the energy that had swirled around the room began to settle. The vibrations under their boots faded, replaced by a calm hum. The Queen lowered her arms, her glowing eyes softer now. Through their minds, she projected a thought: "You have chosen wisely. You have acted with care. You may leave, but remember what you have witnessed." Paul stepped back, relief flooding him, but he did not speak. He looked at Myra, and in her eyes he saw the same mix of fear and awe that he felt. They had faced something beyond human understanding and survived. Tomasz exhaled loudly. "It's done. The tomb is sealed again." Lena glanced around the chamber, her hands still trembling. "We've seen what could happen if power like this is uncontrolled. We can't let anyone open this again." The Queen spoke once more, her voice gentle in their minds. "I am contained, but my message will remain. Humanity is capable of wisdom, bravery, and restraint. Protect what you have learned." Myra stepped away from the sarcophagus, her fingers glowing faintly from the carvings she had touched. She looked at the Queen. "We understand. We will protect it." The Queen's light dimmed further, and she stepped back into the sarcophagus, which sealed itself completely. The chamber returned to silence, but the weight of the experience lingered. The crew knew that their actions had preserved not only their lives, but potentially the safety of countless worlds. Paul placed a hand on Myra's shoulder. "We did it. We chose correctly. Humanity has its place in this universe, not just as explorers, but as guardians." Myra nodded, her mind still filled with visions of the alien empire, the cities, the destruction, and the Queen's sorrow. "We learned a lot today. Not just about them, but about ourselves." The crew turned back toward the passage they had entered, each step heavy with the memory of what had happened. They passed the broken statues, now reduced to dust, their faces frozen in eternal fear. They understood the meaning behind every warning, every symbol, and every scream. Outside the tomb, the moon was quiet once more. The floodlights illuminated the black structure, but it no longer seemed threatening. It was a monument to the power of restraint, to the wisdom of those who had built it, and to the courage of the humans who had dared to face it. Paul looked up at the barren sky. "We have a story to tell," he said. "A story of courage, of wisdom, and of respect for what we do not fully understand." Myra smiled faintly. "And a reminder that some doors should only be opened if you are ready for the consequences." The crew returned to their ship, their steps slower than usual. They were exhausted, but they carried with them knowledge that few humans would ever see. The tomb behind them was silent, sealed, and waiting for the next explorers who might stumble across it. As the ship lifted off the moon, Myra glanced back at the structure one last time. In the faint glow of the floodlights, she thought she saw the carvings shimmer softly, almost as if the tomb itself was acknowledging their choice. The scream had been heard, the warning delivered, and humanity had risen to the challenge. In the vast emptiness of space, the explorers understood that their actions had preserved not only their own world, but the balance of distant stars. Humanity had proven its strength, not through conquest, but through wisdom, courage, and careful choice. The tomb remained, silent now, holding its secrets once more, a reminder of the power that lay in restraint and the voices of the past that demanded respect.